I've been a police officer for over a decade now, and I've seen my fair share of strange and unsettling things. But there's one night that stands out in my memory, a night that still sends chills down my spine, and I can't shake the feeling that I'm not the same after it. It was a quiet night in the spring of 2017 when I was working the night shift in a small town in Wyoming, patrolling the vast stretches of Highway 26. The highway was known for its desolate stretches and dark, winding roads, and that night was no different. I had just finished a long shift, and the moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie glow on the landscape. The radio was mostly quiet, save for the occasional chatter about minor traffic stops and the odd report of a cow wandering too close to the road. Around 2 a.m., I received a call from dispatch. Unit 4, we have a report of a vehicle broken down on Highway 26 near mile marker 45. Caller reports seeing a young woman waving for help. Proceed with caution. Copy that, I replied, glancing at the fuel gauge, enough to make the trip. I headed out, the tires crunching on the gravel as I turned onto the highway. The further I drove, the darker it became. The highway stretched out before me like a ribbon of black asphalt, surrounded by the endless expanse of the Wyoming plains. The stars twinkled overhead, but the solitude was unsettling. As I approached mile marker 45, I spotted the faint glow of hazard lights up ahead. I pulled over and switched on my own lights, stepping out into the cool night air. A rusted sedan sat on the side of the road, its hood propped open, steam curling into the night. A young woman stood next to the car, her silhouette illuminated by the headlights. "Hey there, you all right?" I called, walking toward her. She looked up, and I was taken aback by her expression. Her eyes were wide with panic, and her hair was disheveled, as if she had been in distress for a while. "I can't get it to start," she exclaimed, her voice shaky. "I was driving home from a party, and it just died." "Okay, let's take a look," I said, moving closer. I checked the engine while she fidgeted nervously beside me. The smell of burnt oil filled the air, and I could see a few wires had come loose. As I worked, I tried to calm her down. "It's all right. We'll figure this out." But the longer I spent with her, the more uneasy I felt. Something was off about the situation. I asked her where she was coming from, and she mentioned a party about 20 miles back. But when I asked her where she lived, her answer was vague, and I could see her eyes darting around nervously, as if she were expecting something to happen. "Do you have a phone? Maybe we can call a tow truck," I suggested. But she shook her head. "No service out here. I thought I could flag someone down." Just then, I heard something in the distance, a low rumbling sound, almost like thunder. But it wasn't coming from the sky. I turned, squinting into the darkness. "What's that?" I asked, feeling my heart start to race. She looked over her shoulder, her face pale. "I don't know. I heard it too." The rumble grew louder, echoing across the plains. I stepped away from the car and squinted into the dark. That's when I saw it. A pair of headlights approaching rapidly from down the highway. The lights grew brighter until they filled my vision, and I felt a wave of relief wash over me. "Looks like someone's coming," I called back to her. But instead of relief, I saw terror flash across her face. "No, no, get away from the road." I froze. "What?" "Please, you have to hide," she pleaded, her voice rising in desperation. Before I could react, she grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the ditch at the side of the road. I stumbled, trying to shake her off. "What the hell are you talking about?" But she was insistent. "You don't understand. You need to hide." The headlights came closer, illuminating the area around us. I glanced up, and my heart dropped. The car that was approaching was unlike any I had ever seen. Black, with tinted windows, and a hood that seemed too low to be a standard vehicle. It moved with a sinister grace, gliding silently down the highway. "Get down," she hissed, pushing me into the ditch. I hit the ground hard, dirt and gravel digging into my skin. I could hear her breathing heavily beside me, and I felt a chill run down my spine. The car stopped directly in front of us, its engine humming softly. The headlights shone down the road, casting long shadows that danced around the ditch. I turned my head, trying to get a better look at the car and the person inside, but the tinted windows were too dark. "Please, don't let them see us," the woman whispered, her voice trembling. "What do you mean? Who are they?" But she didn't answer. Instead, she pressed her hand over her mouth, trying to suppress her fear. I could feel my own pulse racing, adrenaline flooding my system. I wanted to get back to my cruiser, to call for backup, but I didn't want to leave her alone. The passenger door opened slowly, and a figure stepped out. He was tall and thin, wearing a dark coat that blended into the night. He moved with an unsettling calm, glancing around as if he were searching for something. I felt a knot form in my stomach. "Do you see him?" the woman whispered, her grip tightening around my arm. "Yes," I said, barely above a whisper. The man walked around the car, his eyes scanning the area. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, each beat echoing in my ears. What was happening? Why were we hiding? As he moved closer, I could see his face, pale, almost gaunt, with hollow eyes that seemed to pierce through the darkness. He stopped just a few feet from where we lay, his gaze fixed on the ditch. My breath caught in my throat as he tilted his head, as if he could sense us nearby. "Get back," I hissed, but she didn't move. Then, the man turned abruptly, as if he'd heard something. He walked toward the side of the road, pausing for a moment before stepping back toward the car. The tension in the air was suffocating. Just then, the headlights of a second car appeared in the distance, cutting through the night. Relief washed over me as the newcomer approached, but the woman next to me stiffened. "No, they can't see us," she cried. Before I could respond, she scrambled to her feet and darted into the woods lining the highway. "Wait!" I shouted, but it was too late. She was gone, swallowed by the darkness. I cursed under my breath, torn between going after her and staying hidden. The second car pulled up, and I took the chance to inch closer to the road. The man was now watching the new arrival, his expression unreadable. I needed to know what was happening. Two men stepped out of the second car, one short and stocky, the other taller, but equally intimidating. They approached the first man, exchanging hushed words. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but their body language was tense. They were clearly up to something, and my instincts kicked in. I reached for my radio, but my heart sank when I remembered it was still in the cruiser. I couldn't risk alerting them to my presence without knowing what they were planning. As the men continued to talk, I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. It was her, the young woman, crouched low in the underbrush. She was watching the scene unfold, her eyes wide with fear. I motioned for her to come to me, but she shook her head, urging me to stay down. The men suddenly turned, as if sensing something. My heart raced as I ducked back behind a tree, trying to remain hidden. The first man gestured toward the woods, and I held my breath, waiting for whatever was about to happen. Then, the short man began to move toward the edge of the tree line. I could see his silhouette through the darkness, and I felt panic wash over me. If he found us, we were done for. "Come on, let's go," the tall man said, and just like that, they turned to leave. The first man glanced back one last time, and for a moment, our eyes met. I felt a chill run down my spine, a sense of dread that I couldn't explain. As soon as they were gone, I motioned for the woman to join me. "We have to get out of here," I whispered urgently. She crawled toward me, her eyes filled with tears. I was so scared. I thought they were going to take me. "Who were they?" I demanded, my heart racing. She shook her head. "I don't know. I just know they were following me." The fear in her voice sent a shiver down my spine. "What do you mean, following you?" "I was driving home, and I saw their car behind me for miles. When I pulled over to fix my engine, they stopped too. I thought I could get help, but then I saw them get out of the car, and I just panicked." We both glanced back toward the highway, still filled with anxiety. The last thing I wanted was to confront those men again, but I couldn't leave her alone out here. "We need to get back to my cruiser," I said, weighing my options. "Can you call for backup?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Yeah, but we need to be quick." We made our way back to the road, crouching low as we moved. I could see my cruiser parked a few hundred feet away, and we started to sprint toward it. Just as we reached the vehicle, I heard the low rumble of an engine returning. "Get in!" I shouted, yanking the door open. We dove inside, and I slammed the door shut. I quickly turned the key in the ignition, praying it would start. The engine roared to life, and I shifted into gear, just as the headlights of the men's car appeared down the highway. "Drive!" she screamed, and I hit the gas, the tires screeching as we tore away from the scene. As we sped down the highway, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The men were still behind us, their headlights cutting through the night. My heart raced as I navigated the winding road, adrenaline coursing through my veins. "Call for backup," she urged, and I fumbled for my radio, trying to remember the frequencies. "Dispatch, this is Unit 4. I need backup immediately. 2 armed suspects are pursuing us on Highway 26. "Copy that, Unit 4. Backup is on the way. Do you need medical assistance?" "No, just hurry," I replied, my voice shaking. I glanced in the rear view again, my stomach dropping as I saw their car gaining on us. "They're getting closer." The woman turned to me, her eyes wide with terror. "What do we do?" I tried to focus, thinking fast. "I'm going to take a shortcut through the woods. Hold on." I veered off the highway onto a dirt road, my tires kicking up gravel as we sped into the darkness. The trees loomed overhead, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. I could barely see where I was going, and every bump sent jolts through the car. "Is this going to work?" she asked, fear etched on her face. "I don't know," I admitted, glancing back again. The men's headlights were still visible, their car unrelenting. I turned sharply, praying I could lose them in the maze of trees. We bounced over roots and rocks, the car rattling beneath us. I could hear the engine straining, but I kept pushing it, desperate to escape. Then, out of nowhere, I hit something. The car jolted violently, and I swerved, trying to regain control. My heart sank as I realized what I had hit: a deer, lying motionless in the underbrush. The car came to a stop, the engine sputtering. "Go, go!" the woman shouted, scrambling to get out. "No, stay in the car," I ordered, but I could see panic in her eyes. I opened my door and stepped out, glancing back at the road. I could hear the men's car approaching, their engine roaring like a beast in the night. "Come on," I shouted, pulling her toward the trees. We ran into the woods, branches whipping against our faces as we pushed deeper into the darkness. My breath came in ragged gasps, and I could hear the distant sound of the car tires crunching on gravel. We stopped behind a large tree, trying to catch our breath. "What are we going to do?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Just stay quiet," I whispered, straining to listen. The sound of the car grew louder, then stopped. I felt a surge of fear as I realized they might be looking for us. "What if they find us?" she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Just trust me," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. For what felt like an eternity, we waited, holding our breath. I could hear footsteps in the underbrush, and my heart raced as I crouched low. The men were searching for us, and I had no idea how we would get out of this alive. Suddenly, I heard a voice call out, muffled but distinct. "We know you're out here. You can't run forever." I exchanged a terrified glance with the woman. "Who are they?" she whispered. "I don't know," I admitted, feeling helpless. Then, in a shocking moment of clarity, I realized something. "We need to split up," I said quickly. "If we can throw them off, maybe one of us can make it back to the road and call for help." "No, we can't do that," she protested. "It's the only way," I insisted, my heart racing. "I'll create a distraction. You go that way and find a way back to the highway. We can't stay here. Please, don't leave me." "I'll be right behind you," I promised, my voice steady even as my insides churned. With a heavy heart, I pushed her in the opposite direction, urging her to run. As she disappeared into the darkness, I took a deep breath and began to move in the opposite direction, careful to make noise and lead them away from her. I could hear the footsteps drawing closer, and my heart pounded in my chest. I moved quietly through the trees, trying to stay low as I circled around. The voices of the men grew louder, and I could feel panic setting in. I needed to create a diversion. I found a fallen branch and broke off a sizable piece, holding it tight in my hand. As I positioned myself behind a tree, I waited for the sound of footsteps to get even closer. Then, with all my might, I hurled the branch into the underbrush a few yards away, the loud crack echoing through the trees. "Over there!" one of the men shouted, and I quickly ducked behind the tree, my heart racing as I heard them crashing through the brush. I used the moment to move further back, my mind racing with fear and desperation. I needed to get to the road and find help before they caught up with me. But as I moved deeper into the woods, I suddenly felt a surge of unease. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that something was lurking just out of sight. The darkness felt alive, pressing in around me, and I could hear whispers floating through the trees. I turned, trying to shake off the feeling, and that's when I saw her, standing a few yards away, her eyes wide with terror. "Help!" she cried, but before I could respond, I heard the men returning, their voices angry and frustrated. "Split up! We'll find them!" one of them shouted. "Run!" I yelled at her, and we took off in opposite directions, adrenaline surging through my veins. I pushed through the underbrush, praying I was going in the right direction. I could hear the men crashing through the trees behind me, their voices echoing in the night. I stumbled, my heart racing as I fought to regain my footing. Just when I thought I might get away, I found myself at the edge of a small clearing. In the moonlight, I could see a dilapidated cabin sitting at the far end, the windows shattered and the door hanging off its hinges. I could hear the men's voices growing closer, and I knew I had to make a decision. I dashed toward the cabin, praying that it would provide some cover. As I reached the door, I pushed it open, the rusty hinges creaking ominously. I slipped inside and closed the door quietly behind me, my heart pounding in my ears. Inside, the air was stale and thick with dust. I could barely see in the darkness, but I stumbled forward, searching for a place to hide. My eyes adjusted slowly, and I spotted a set of stairs leading to the upper floor. I darted up the stairs and squeezed into a small corner of the attic, trying to control my breathing as I listened for the men. Downstairs, I could hear them searching the cabin. "They have to be around here somewhere," one of them growled. "They couldn't have gone far," another replied. I held my breath, praying they wouldn't find me. I could hear their footsteps echoing through the cabin as they moved closer to the staircase. "Check up there!" one of them shouted, and my heart sank. I quickly glanced around, trying to find something to defend myself with, but there was nothing. My pulse quickened as I listened to their footsteps on the stairs, each creak of the wood sending waves of panic through me. Come on, they have to be up here. The door to the attic creaked open, and I pressed myself into the corner, hoping they wouldn't see me. My heart raced as I saw a flashlight beam cut through the darkness. "Where are you?" one of them called out, his voice filled with malice. Suddenly, the beam fell on me, and I froze. "There," he shouted. I leaped up, adrenaline fueling my movements as I dashed past him and down the stairs. I could hear him yelling behind me as I bolted through the cabin and out into the night, running blindly into the woods. The moonlight illuminated the path ahead, but I didn't stop to think. I sprinted through the trees, branches whipping against my skin as I moved, desperate to escape. But just as I thought I had put enough distance between us, I stumbled and fell, hitting the ground hard. Pain shot through my leg, but I pushed through, scrambling back to my feet. I could hear them getting closer, their laughter echoing in the darkness. "You can't hide forever," one of them taunted. Panic surged through me, and I dashed forward, but I could feel my strength waning. I needed to get back to the road, back to my cruiser. Finally, I broke through the trees and stumbled onto the highway. I could see the lights of my cruiser in the distance, and I fought to push myself forward. But my legs felt heavy, my heart pounding in my chest. Just then, I heard the sound of a car approaching, and I turned, hope surging within me. I raised my hands, waving frantically. The car slowed, and I could see the headlights illuminating my frantic figure. "Please, help me!" I screamed. But as the car pulled up, I froze. It was the same black vehicle from earlier. The men stepped out, and my blood ran cold. "There you are," one of them said with a sinister grin. "We've been looking for you." Panic surged through me, and I turned to run, but it was too late. They grabbed me, pulling me toward the car. I fought with everything I had, but they were too strong. As they shoved me into the back seat, I caught a glimpse of the driver, the tall man with the hollow eyes. He smiled at me, and I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. "Let her go," a voice shouted, and I turned to see the young woman standing by my cruiser, her eyes filled with determination. "Get away," I yelled, but she didn't back down. "I'm not leaving you," she shouted, and in that moment, I realized she wasn't just a victim. She was strong, and she was willing to fight. The men exchanged glances, momentarily distracted. That's when I saw my chance. I lunged forward, knocking the man beside me out of the way. The door swung open, and I scrambled out, grabbing the young woman's hand. We ran toward the cruiser, my heart racing as we dove inside. "Get in," I shouted, and she followed me, slamming the door shut. I fumbled for the keys, my hands shaking as I turned the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I slammed the car into gear, tearing away from the scene. As we sped down the highway, I could see the black car in the rearview mirror, the men chasing after us. My heart raced as I pushed the accelerator to the floor, praying we could get away. But just when I thought we might escape, the headlights grew closer, the men refusing to give up. "Hold on," I shouted, gripping the wheel tightly as I swerved around a curve. The tires squealed against the asphalt, and I could feel the adrenaline surging through me. The young woman beside me clutched the dashboard, her eyes wide with fear. "What are we going to do?" "Just keep quiet. We're almost there." I could see the lights of the town ahead, and I pushed harder, willing the car to go faster. But just as we reached the edge of town, the black car pulled up alongside us, the men leaning out of the windows, their faces twisted with anger. "Stop! You can't get away!" one of them shouted, and I felt a surge of fear. But I didn't stop. I slammed on the accelerator, weaving through traffic as I approached the police station. "Get ready!" I shouted, and as we reached the station, I swerved into the parking lot, screeching to a halt. I bolted out of the car, my heart pounding as I raced toward the doors, the young woman right behind me. I threw open the doors and ran inside, yelling for backup. The officers inside jumped into action, grabbing their weapons and rushing outside. I turned to the young woman, who was still breathing heavily beside me. "Are you okay?" "I think so," she replied, tears streaming down her cheeks. Just then, the front doors burst open, and the two men stormed in, their faces twisted with rage. "You can't hide from us!" one of them screamed. But before they could get any closer, the officers sprang into action, surrounding the men and forcing them to the ground. I could hardly breathe as I watched, relief flooding through me. Within moments, the situation was under control. The men were handcuffed and taken away, their threats silenced. I turned to the young woman, who was still trembling beside me. "We made it," I said, wrapping my arm around her shoulders. "I thought we were done for," she whispered, her voice shaky. But as I stood there, watching the officers lead the men away, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. The events of that night haunted me for months, a reminder of the darkness that lurked in the shadows. I couldn't forget the hollow eyes of the man who had chased us, nor could I shake the feeling that there was something more sinister at play. Though we had escaped, I knew the danger still lurked out there, waiting for the next unsuspecting victim. As I continued my work as a police officer, I carried the weight of that night with me, a reminder of the fragility of life and the darkness that could be hidden behind even the most innocent appearances. It started as an ordinary Friday night. I had just wrapped up a long shift at the diner and was heading back to my apartment on the outskirts of a small town in Illinois. The air was crisp and the moon hung low, casting an eerie glow on the empty streets. As I turned the key to my apartment door, I noticed a police cruiser parked a block away. Nothing unusual. It's a quiet neighborhood, and the cops often make rounds to keep it that way. I tossed my bag onto the couch and settled in with a frozen dinner and a rerun of an old crime show. It was almost midnight when I heard the first knock at my door. It was loud, deliberate, and unsettling. I froze, fork halfway to my mouth, and stared at the door. "Who is it?" I called out. There was no response, just silence. I lived alone, so my paranoia kicked in immediately. I tiptoed to the peephole and peered out. Nothing. The hallway was empty. A chill crept up my spine, but I shook it off. Maybe I'd imagined it. I double-checked the locks, turned off the TV, and went to bed. I had just begun to drift off when the second knock came, this time louder and more insistent. My heart pounded in my chest. It wasn't just a random knock. It felt purposeful, almost taunting. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? A calm voice answered. There's someone knocking on my door, and I live alone, I whispered, my voice trembling. Is the person still there? The operator asked. I don't know. They knocked twice, but there's no one in the hall. We'll send an officer to your location. Stay inside and keep your door locked. I thanked her and hung up, my hands shaking. Minutes passed like hours as I sat in the dark, clutching my phone. Finally, I saw flashing red and blue lights through the curtains. A soft knock followed on my door, and a voice announced, "Police." I opened the door cautiously. 2 officers stood there, one older with a tired face, and the other younger, still fresh-faced and alert. "We got a call about a disturbance," the older one said, glancing around. I explained what had happened. They nodded, exchanged a glance, and one of them asked to check the hallway. The younger officer walked down the corridor, shining his flashlight into the shadows. "Nothing here?" he called back. The older officer gave me a reassuring smile. "Probably just a prank. It happens. Call us if it happens again." They left, and I felt a bit foolish. Maybe it was just some teenager messing around. But as I closed the door, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I barely slept that night. Every creak of the building made my heart race. The next day, I told my neighbor, an elderly woman named Mrs. Carson, about the incident. She frowned deeply. "You're not the first," she said, her voice low. "A few months ago, the same thing happened to a woman down the hall, knocking in the middle of the night. She called the police too, but they never found anyone. She moved out not long after." That sent a shiver through me. I tried to go about my day, but my mind kept drifting back to the knocks. That evening, I made sure every window and door was locked, and even put a chair under the doorknob, just in case. Around 2 a.m., I woke to the sound of my phone buzzing. It was a text from an unknown number. The message read, "Why didn't you answer?" My blood ran cold. I stared at the screen, trying to make sense of it. My heart pounded as another message came through. "I know you're awake." I immediately called the police again. When the same officers arrived, I showed them the messages. The older one's expression hardened. "Have you shared your number recently? Anyone new in your life?" he asked. I shook my head. "No, I don't even use social media much." The younger officer suggested it might be a spoofed number and told me to block it. But I could see the tension in their faces. They told me to stay vigilant and left. The next few nights were quiet. I started to think maybe it was over. But then, on Wednesday night, the knocks returned. 3 sharp raps this time. My stomach dropped. I didn't dare move. I waited, heart hammering, until I heard footsteps retreating down the hall. I crept to the peephole and saw a figure, a man in a dark hoodie, walking toward the stairwell. I couldn't make out his face, but something about the way he moved made my skin crawl. I called the police again, and this time they promised to increase patrols around the building. That's when the dreams started. Night after night, I dreamed of the knocks. But in the dream, when I opened the door, there was no hallway, just darkness. And standing in that darkness was a man with no face, just a blank, featureless void where his features should have been. I woke up drenched in sweat, my heart racing. The sense of unease was unbearable. I decided to install a security camera outside my door. If this person came back, I'd have proof. 2 nights later, the camera caught him. Around 3 a.m., the man in the hoodie approached my door. He stood there for a long time, just staring. Then, he knocked. Once, twice, 3 times, before leaning close to the door as if listening. After a moment, he turned and walked away. I showed the footage to the police. They promised to investigate, but I could tell they didn't have much to go on. The man's face was obscured, and he wore gloves, leaving no prints. I started staying with a friend across town, too afraid to sleep in my own apartment. A week later, I got a call from Mrs. Carson. She sounded frantic. "Someone broke into my apartment last night," she said. "I think it's the same person who was knocking on your door." My blood ran cold. I urged her to call the police, but she hesitated. "They didn't take anything," she said, her voice trembling. "They just stood there. I woke up, and he was standing at the foot of my bed. I stayed on the line with her until the police arrived. The next day, I decided I couldn't live there anymore. I broke my lease and moved out within a week. Months passed, and I tried to put the whole thing behind me. Then, one night, as I was scrolling through the news, a headline caught my eye. Man arrested in connection with string of break-ins and murders across the Midwest. My heart sank as I clicked on the article. The man in the mugshot was the same one from my security footage. The article detailed how he had been targeting single women, knocking on their doors late at night to see if they were home. If they didn't answer, he'd move on. If they did, well, the bodies he left behind told the rest of the story. The realization hit me like a freight train. By not answering the door that first night, I had saved my own life. To this day, I can't hear a knock at the door without freezing. Even now, as I sit here writing this, I swear I can hear it. Faint, deliberate, and chilling, knocking from somewhere deep in the silence. I've always thought of myself as rational, not the kind of person who gets caught up in conspiracy theories or ghost stories. I believed what I could see, hear, or touch. That's probably why I became a dispatcher for the police department in a small Texas town. It was a job that made sense. Facts, logic, action. But there's one night I can't explain, and it still haunts me. It was late January, and the air had the kind of bite that makes you want to stay inside. The night shift was always quiet, boring even. I liked it that way. Fewer calls, fewer emergencies, and fewer chances for something to go wrong. But that night, something went very wrong. It started with a routine call at 10:47 p.m. A woman named Sarah Pierce reported a disturbance in her neighborhood. She lived on the edge of town, near the old Pine Hollow forest. She said she heard someone, or something, screaming in the woods. It sounded like a woman, she said, her voice shaking. But I don't know. It didn't sound right. I reassured her, saying I'd send an officer to check it out. I dispatched Officer Mark Reynolds, one of the most experienced guys on the force. Mark was steady, unshakable, the kind of cop who'd seen it all. "Dispatch, this is Reynolds, heading to the Pierce residence," he confirmed over the radio. I noted the time, 10:52 p.m. 10 minutes later, Mark called in again. "Dispatch, I'm at the location. Gonna check the woods. Resident said she heard the noise about 15 minutes ago." "Copy that," I replied. "Keep me updated." The radio went silent, which wasn't unusual. Mark was thorough. If he didn't find anything, he'd wrap it up and let me know. But as the minutes dragged on, a strange feeling began to creep over me. I glanced at the clock. 11:15 p.m. I picked up the radio. "Reynolds, this is dispatch. Status check." No response. "Reynolds, do you copy?" I tried again, my voice tightening. Nothing. By 11:30, I decided to send backup. Officer Lisa Morales was the only other officer on duty that night. She wasn't thrilled about heading out to Pine Hollow, but she didn't argue. "On my way," she said. As I waited, my unease grew. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I tried calling Mark's cell phone, but it went straight to voicemail. I checked the system to see if his body cam was transmitting. It wasn't. At 11:45 p.m., Lisa's voice crackled over the radio. "Dispatch, I'm at the Pierce residence. Reynolds' cruiser is here, but there's no sign of him." "Copy that," I said. "Proceed with caution." Lisa's breathing was audible over the radio as she walked into the woods. "Dispatch, I hear something. It's faint, but it's coming from deeper in the trees. Stand by." My pulse quickened as I listened. A few moments later, she spoke again. "Dispatch, I think I found something." Her voice was strained, almost disbelieving. "What is it?" I asked, my heart pounding. "It's his flashlight. It's just lying here, but there's no sign of Reynolds. It's like he dropped it and walked off. There's no footprints, though. Just his." "Stay where you are," I said. "I'm sending more units." "Negative," she replied. "I'm gonna keep looking. I think I hear something ahead." I wanted to argue, but before I could, she was gone. Minutes ticked by in agonizing silence. Then, at 12:03 a.m., Lisa's voice came back, panicked and breathless. "Dispatch, something's out here." "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice shaking. "I don't know. I saw something. It was tall, like a person, but wrong. Its eyes." The transmission cut off with a burst of static. "Morales, do you copy?" I shouted into the radio. Silence. My stomach churned. I called the sergeant on duty and explained the situation. Within minutes, every available officer was en route to Pine Hollow. By 12:30, a full search was underway. They found Lisa's radio near the flashlight, but no sign of her or Mark. The woods were scoured for hours, but it was like they'd vanished into thin air. The next morning, the search expanded, involving neighboring counties and even state police. The media caught wind of it, and soon our quiet town was swarming with reporters. Days turned into weeks, and the case went cold. Mark Reynolds and Lisa Morales were officially declared missing, presumed dead. Their families were devastated, and the department was shaken to its core. But that wasn't the end of it. About a month later, I was working another night shift when I heard it. "Dispatch, this is Reynolds." I froze. The voice was faint, crackling with static, but it was unmistakable. "Mark?" I whispered, my throat dry. "Dispatch, I'm in the woods. I don't know where I am." His voice was broken, like a bad recording. "Mark, we've been looking for you. Where are you?" No response. "Mark, do you copy?" The radio hissed, then fell silent. I immediately reported it, but when they checked the logs, there was no record of the transmission. They said it was probably interference or a prank, but I know what I heard. Over the next few months, other dispatchers reported similar incidents. Voices on the radio claiming to be Mark or Lisa, always faint, always distorted. Some officers refused to patrol near Pine Hollow, saying they felt like they were being watched. I eventually left the job. I couldn't handle the constant reminders, the nagging questions that would never be answered. It's been years now, but I still think about that night, about the screams in the woods, about the things Lisa saw, about Mark's last radio call. Sometimes, late at night, I'll turn on my old police scanner and listen. Most of the time, it's just the usual chatter, routine traffic stops, noise complaints, the occasional emergency. But every now and then, I hear it. "Dispatch, this is Reynolds." And I turn it off, because I don't want to know what comes next. I never thought I'd be afraid of the people I worked with. I joined the police force because I believed in protecting my community, in making a difference. I never imagined I'd uncover something so dark, so unexplainable, that it would leave me questioning everything. It happened during my 3rd year on the force, in a small town in Oregon. The place was quiet for the most part, occasional domestic disputes, a bar fight here and there, but nothing out of the ordinary. That changed one fall night, during what I thought would be a routine patrol. It was late October, and the air had a strange heaviness to it, like the world was holding its breath. I was partnered with Officer Joel Carter, a man who had been on the force for nearly 20 years. Joel was the kind of cop who never let anything rattle him. He'd seen it all, or so he claimed. That night, we were assigned to Sector 9, the outskirts of town, near the old quarry. The area was mostly abandoned, with crumbling buildings and overgrown roads. It was the kind of place you'd expect teenagers to use for late-night parties, but even they avoided it. "Ever been out here at night?" Joel asked as we drove through the darkness. "Not really," I admitted, trying to sound casual. He glanced at me, his face illuminated by the glow of the dashboard. "It's different out here after dark. You'll see." I didn't ask him to elaborate. Around midnight, we got a call about a possible trespasser near the quarry. A woman had reported seeing someone wandering through the area with a flashlight. She sounded uneasy, like she didn't want to make the call, but felt she had to. "We'll check it out," Joel said into the radio. The road to the quarry was barely passable, with potholes and fallen branches everywhere. As we pulled up, the beams of our headlights revealed the outline of the old quarry office, a crumbling 2-story building with shattered windows. Beyond it was the pit itself, a massive hole in the earth surrounded by rusting fences and faded warning signs. We got out of the cruiser, flashlights cutting through the darkness. The air was unnaturally still, and the only sound was the crunch of gravel beneath our boots. "Dispatch, this is Unit 12. We're on scene at the quarry. No sign of anyone yet," Joel reported. "Copy that, Unit 12, came the response. We split up, Joel heading toward the pit while I checked the office. The building was even creepier up close. The door hung open, swaying slightly in the breeze. I stepped inside, my flashlight sweeping across the graffiti-covered walls and broken furniture. The air smelled of mildew and decay. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing. No response. I moved deeper into the building, my pulse quickening with every step. I found an old desk, its drawers pulled out and emptied long ago. Just as I was about to turn back, I heard it, a faint shuffling sound coming from upstairs. "Joel, I think I've got something," I said into my radio. "Copy that. I'm on my way," he replied. I climbed the rickety stairs, each step groaning under my weight. The second floor was even more decrepit, with holes in the floor and peeling wallpaper. I followed the sound to a room at the end of the hall. The door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open with my flashlight, revealing a small, empty space. There was nothing there, just a broken chair and a pile of old newspapers. And then I saw it. On the far wall, written in what looked like charcoal, were the words, "Get out." I barely had time to process it before Joel appeared behind me. "Anything?" he asked. I pointed to the wall. His expression darkened, but he didn't say anything. We searched the rest of the building but found no sign of anyone. Joel seemed unusually quiet as we returned to the cruiser. "Probably just some kids messing around," he muttered, more to himself than to me. We radioed back to dispatch, reporting the area clear. But as we pulled out of the quarry, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The rest of the night was uneventful, and by the time my shift ended, I had almost convinced myself it was nothing. But then, 2 nights later, we got another call. This time about strange lights near the same quarry. Joel and I were dispatched again. I could tell he wasn't thrilled about it, but he didn't complain. When we arrived, the scene was almost identical. The abandoned office, the gaping pit, the suffocating silence. But this time, we weren't alone. As we approached the quarry, our flashlights caught movement near the edge of the pit. It was a man, standing perfectly still, staring down into the darkness. "Sir, this is the police," Joel called out. "You're trespassing. Turn around slowly." The man didn't move. Joel exchanged a look with me, then stepped closer. "Sir, I'm not going to ask you again." The man turned abruptly, and my blood ran cold. His face was pale, almost translucent, and his eyes didn't look human. They were black, like pools of ink, reflecting the light from our flashlights. Joel froze, his hand hovering near his holster. "Sir, I need you to..." Before he could finish, the man let out a piercing scream, a sound so unnatural it felt like it was tearing through my skull. Then, without warning, he bolted into the pit, disappearing into the darkness below. "Holy," Joel muttered, his voice shaking. We stood there, stunned, until Joel finally snapped out of it and radioed for backup. A full search of the quarry was conducted, but no trace of the man was ever found. That night marked the beginning of a string of bizarre incidents. Officers reported hearing whispers on their radios, seeing shadowy figures in their patrol car mirrors, and even finding strange symbols carved into the walls of the precinct. Joel quit a month later. He wouldn't talk about why, but I didn't blame him. I stuck it out for another year before transferring to another town. To this day, I can't explain what we saw that night. I've heard the stories, the rumors about the quarry being cursed, about people disappearing there for decades. All I know is that I still dream about those black eyes, staring back at me from the darkness. I don't tell many people this story, but when I do, I always warn them. Don't go digging into it. This isn't the kind of thing you want to invite into your life. I learned that the hard way. I joined the police force in Detroit when I was 24. Young, eager, and convinced I was going to make a difference. Back then, I had a partner named Eric Martinez, a good cop, tough but fair, with a sharp sense of humor that made the rough days manageable. It happened in the fall of 2008, during one of our overnight patrols. Eric and I were assigned to a beat near 8th Street, a rough area, even by Detroit standards. The houses were mostly abandoned, their windows boarded up or smashed, and the streets were littered with broken glass and old tires. Around 1 a.m., we got a call about a disturbance at 843 8th Street. The address caught my attention immediately. That house had a reputation. People said it was cursed, that anyone who stayed there too long either went crazy or disappeared. It was the kind of urban legend you laughed off during the day, but didn't want to think about at night. 838th, Eric said when I read the address aloud. He chuckled, but there was an edge to it. "You ever been there?" I shook my head. "Well, you're in for a treat," he said. When we arrived, the house looked worse than I expected. The roof sagged in the middle, the porch was caved in on one side, and the front door hung open like a gaping mouth. I could hear the wind whistling through the broken windows, and for a moment, I thought about how easy it would be to just drive away, call it a false alarm. But we couldn't do that. Eric and I approached the house, our flashlights cutting through the darkness. The air felt heavy, like it was pressing down on my chest. "Police!" Eric called out as we stepped inside. "If anyone's here, make yourself known." The inside was worse than the outside. The floor was covered in debris, shattered furniture, old newspapers, even a few dead rats. The walls were smeared with something dark that I told myself was just dirt. Then we heard it. A soft, rhythmic creaking coming from upstairs. "Probably the wind," I whispered, though I didn't believe it. Eric shot me a look. "Wind doesn't make that kind of noise." We followed the sound, our boots crunching on the broken floorboards. The staircase groaned under our weight, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the house was alive, that it was watching us. When we reached the second floor, the creaking stopped. "Police," Eric called again. "We're not here to hurt you. Just come out where we can see you." Silence. We split up, checking the rooms one by one. Most of them were empty, just piles of rubble and graffiti-covered walls. But when I reached the last room at the end of the hall, I froze. It was a child's bedroom. The walls were painted a faded pink, and a broken crib sat in the corner. But what caught my attention was the writing on the walls. "Get out." The words were scrawled over and over, in jagged, uneven letters, like someone had written them in a frenzy. Some of them were smeared, like whoever wrote them had been crying or shaking. "Eric," I called, my voice barely above a whisper. He appeared behind me a moment later, his flashlight sweeping across the room. "Jesus," he muttered. Before I could respond, we heard it again. That creaking sound, louder this time. It was coming from the attic. "Stay close," Eric said, his hand on his holster. We found the attic door in the hallway, a pull-down ladder covered in dust and cobwebs. Eric yanked the cord, and the ladder creaked as it unfolded. The smell hit me first, something rotten, like spoiled meat left in the sun. I gagged, covering my mouth with my sleeve. Eric climbed up first, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. I followed, every muscle in my body tense. The attic was small and cramped, the air thick with that nauseating stench. Our flashlights swept across the space, revealing old trunks, broken chairs, and piles of decaying newspapers. And then we saw her. A woman, sitting in the corner with her back to us. Her hair was long and matted, and she was rocking back and forth, humming softly to herself. "Ma'am," Eric said, his voice steady but cautious. "We're with the police. Are you okay?" She didn't respond. "Ma'am," he said again, stepping closer. That's when she stopped humming. Her head snapped around so fast I nearly screamed. Her face. I'll never forget her face. Her eyes were wide and black, her skin pale and stretched tight over her bones. Her mouth twisted into a grin that looked more like a snarl. Then she lunged. Eric shouted, pulling his weapon, but she was fast, inhumanly fast. She knocked him over and disappeared down the ladder before I could even react. "Go, go!" Eric shouted, scrambling to his feet. We raced downstairs, our flashlights bouncing wildly. When we reached the front door, she was gone. We called for backup, but by the time more officers arrived, there was no trace of her. The house was searched from top to bottom, but it was like she had vanished into thin air. The official report said it was a squatter, a drug addict, hallucinating in a rundown house. But Eric and I knew better. He transferred to another precinct a few weeks later, and I can't say I blamed him. I stayed, but I avoided 8th Street like the plague. A few months after the incident, I got a call from an officer who had taken over Eric's old beat. He sounded shaken. "Did you ever handle anything weird on 8th Street?" he asked. "Why?" I said, my stomach sinking. "There was a call last night," he said. "A woman screaming inside 843. When we got there, the place was empty, but..." He trailed off. "But what?" I pressed. "We found writing on the walls," he said. Same word over and over. I didn't have to ask what it said. I already knew. "Get out." When you wear the badge, you expect to encounter danger. You train for it. Prepare yourself for the worst situations. But nothing in the academy prepared me for what happened that summer, or the truth I'd uncover about one of our own. I joined the department in a mid-sized town in Texas, a place that was quiet for the most part, but close enough to the big cities to catch overflow crime. I was young, hungry to prove myself, and I worked harder than anyone else to earn respect. My partner, Officer Mark Holloway, was the kind of cop everyone admired, calm under pressure, quick with a joke, and known for his instinct. Mark was the golden boy of our department, and for good reason. He'd solved a string of tough cases, from violent burglaries to missing persons. The brass loved him, and I did too. He had my back on every call, no matter how messy it got. But there were always rumors about Mark. People said he had a sixth sense, that he knew things he shouldn't. Once, during a domestic call, he told me to check the basement before we'd even spoken to the homeowner. Sure enough, that's where the woman's battered body was hidden. Just a hunch, he'd say, shrugging it off. But his hunches started to bother me, especially when they got darker. The summer of 2016 was brutally hot, the kind of heat that made tempers flare and pushed people to do stupid things. We were swamped with calls, bar fights, thefts, drug overdoses. It felt like the whole town was unraveling. Then the disappearances started. The first was a woman named Tara Morales, a 25-year-old waitress at a diner on the edge of town. She was last seen walking home after her shift. A week later, a mechanic named Ben Johnson vanished on his way to pick up his kids from school. Then a teenage boy, 16-year-old Caleb Dyer, disappeared from a gas station parking lot. 3 people gone in 3 weeks. No leads, no witnesses. The town was on edge, and so were we. The chief put everyone on overtime, combing through surveillance footage, interviewing friends and family, and canvassing the last known locations. Mark and I worked around the clock, but nothing seemed to stick. Then one night, we got a call about a suspicious vehicle parked near an abandoned barn just outside town. Mark insisted we take it, even though we were supposed to be off shift. "I've got a feeling about this one," he said. The barn was a relic of the past, surrounded by overgrown fields and hidden from the road by a line of gnarled trees. The car in question, an old blue sedan, was parked just outside, its driver's side door hanging open. Mark and I stepped out of the cruiser, flashlights cutting through the darkness. The air felt wrong, too still, too heavy. "You take the barn," Mark said. "I'll check the car." I nodded, my stomach churning as I approached the weathered building. The door creaked as I pushed it open, the beam of my flashlight revealing stacks of rotting hay and broken tools. The smell of decay hit me immediately, sharp and sour. That's when I saw it, a pair of muddy footprints leading deeper into the barn. My heart pounded as I followed them, the floor creaking beneath my boots. The prints led to a trapdoor hidden beneath a pile of burlap sacks. I called out to Mark, but there was no answer. Swallowing my fear, I gripped the handle and pulled. The door opened with a groan, revealing a narrow staircase that disappeared into darkness. "Mark?" I called again, louder this time. Still nothing. I climbed down, my flashlight shaking in my hand. The air grew colder with every step, and the smell of decay intensified. At the bottom of the stairs was a small, dirt-floored room with a wooden table in the center. On the table were ropes, a pair of handcuffs, and a hunting knife caked with something dark. My stomach turned as my flashlight landed on a pile of tattered clothes in the corner. Among them was a waitress's uniform, the kind Tara Morales wore. I stumbled back, my breath coming in gasps. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. I spun around, my flashlight illuminating Mark's face. He stood at the bottom of the stairs, his expression unreadable. "What the hell is this?" I demanded, my voice trembling. Mark didn't answer. He just stepped closer, his shadow stretching across the walls like something alive. "Mark," I said, my hand inching toward my holster. "Tell me what's going on." He smiled then, a slow, chilling smile that sent ice through my veins. "You're too good at this job," he said, "too curious for your own good." Before I could react, he lunged at me. We struggled, his strength shocking me. I'd never seen him like this. He slammed me against the wall, knocking the wind out of me, but I managed to draw my weapon. "Stop!" I shouted, aiming it at him. For a moment he hesitated, his eyes locking with mine. Then he laughed. "Do you even know what you're dealing with?" he said, his voice low and almost amused. I didn't answer. Mark raised his hand slowly, backing away. "Go ahead, arrest me, but it won't stop anything." I kept my gun trained on him as I radioed for backup. Within minutes, officers flooded the barn, their lights and voices filling the darkness. Mark didn't resist as they cuffed him, his eerie calm unnerving everyone. The evidence in the barn was enough to tie him to the disappearances, and over the next few weeks, more bodies were discovered in shallow graves across the county. But Mark never confessed, never explained why he did it or how he chose his victims. During his trial, he only said one thing that still haunts me. "It wasn't me. I was just the vessel." He was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. But even now, years later, I can't shake the feeling that he was right, that something else was driving him. I left the force not long after, unable to face the memories. But sometimes, late at night, I think about Mark's words and wonder if whatever controlled him is still out there, waiting for its next vessel. When I became a police officer, I knew I'd see things I couldn't explain. My academy instructors warned us that the job would wear us down, make us question everything we thought we understood about humanity. But no one prepared me for what I encountered on a quiet night shift in late November 2012. A shift that left me with scars far deeper than anything physical. I was working for a small department in southern Missouri at the time, patrolling rural backroads and sleepy neighborhoods where the biggest crime most nights was a busted taillight or a teenager shoplifting from the gas station. It was the kind of place where the town was asleep by 9 p.m., leaving the streets eerily empty during the graveyard shift. That night, the dispatcher's voice crackled over my radio at 11:27 p.m. "Unit 34, we've got a 10 to 96 at 128 Birchwood Lane. Caller reports possible trespassing, suspicious activity near the old Sutter House." The Sutter House. I'd heard stories about it, mostly from the older officers. Abandoned for decades, it was the site of a murder-suicide back in the late 1970s. Supposedly, the Sutters, an affluent family, had spiraled into ruin after Mr. Sutter lost his fortune. One night, he snapped and killed his wife and 2 daughters before turning the gun on himself. The property had been a magnet for ghost stories ever since. Kids dared each other to spend the night there, and local teens painted pentagrams on the walls for fun. The house was condemned, its windows boarded up, but it remained a blight on the edge of town. I keyed my mic. 10-4, dispatch, Unit 34 en route. The drive to Birchwood Lane took about 10 minutes, my headlights cutting through a heavy fog that had settled over the countryside. The farther I drove, the darker it got. Birchwood was a dead-end road, surrounded by dense woods, with the Sutter House sitting at the very end, like a sentinel. I arrived to find a single car parked on the shoulder, its engine off. It was an older model Toyota, the kind of car that had seen better days. I radioed in the plates but didn't get a hit. They weren't in the system. The house loomed ahead, a decaying 2-story structure with its paint peeling and shutters hanging loose. My flashlight's beam barely seemed to penetrate the darkness around it, the fog swallowing the light as quickly as I cast it. I approached cautiously, scanning the yard and the perimeter of the house. There was no sign of anyone outside, but the front door was ajar. "Police," I called out, my voice firm but steady. "If anyone's inside, make yourself known." No response. I stepped onto the creaking porch, my hand resting on my holster. The air felt heavy, thick with moisture, and something else, something I couldn't quite place, like a faint metallic tang. The inside of the house was worse than I expected. Graffiti covered the walls, and the floor was littered with broken glass, beer cans, and discarded syringes. The stench of mildew and rot was overpowering, making my stomach churn. I swept my flashlight across the room, illuminating overturned furniture and a staircase leading to the second floor. That's when I heard it, a faint, shuffling sound coming from upstairs. "Police," I called again, louder this time. "If you're up there, come down with your hands up." The shuffling stopped. My pulse quickened as I climbed the stairs, each step groaning under my weight. At the top, the hallway branched off into 3 rooms. The first 2 were empty, just more debris and vandalism. But the third room was different. It was a child's bedroom, or at least it had been once. The walls were painted a faded pastel pink, and a small wooden bed frame sat in the corner, its mattress missing. But what caught my attention was the figure standing in the middle of the room. It was a man, tall and thin, dressed in a tattered suit that hung off his frame like a scarecrow's clothes. His back was to me, his head tilted slightly to one side, as if he were listening to something. "Sir," I said, drawing my weapon, "turn around slowly and show me your hands." He didn't move. I repeated the command, my voice firmer this time. "Turn around now." Slowly, he began to turn, and my stomach dropped. His face, I can barely describe it. His skin was pale and stretched tight over his skull, his eyes sunken and hollow. But it was his mouth that haunted me most, twisted into a wide, unnatural grin, as though someone had carved it into his face. He raised a hand, pointing past me toward the hallway. "They're here," he said, his voice a raspy whisper. Before I could react, the lights on my flashlight flickered and went out. I was plunged into darkness, the only sound my own ragged breathing. "Dispatch," I said into my radio, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need backup at 128 Birchwood Lane. Possible suspect on site." Static. "Dispatch, do you copy?" The static gave way to a faint voice, barely audible. It wasn't dispatch. "They're here," the voice said, repeating the man's words. I turned back toward the figure, but the room was empty. He was gone. Panic set in as I fumbled for my flashlight, finally managing to get it working again. The room was just as I'd left it, but the man had vanished without a trace. I decided to retreat, calling for backup as I made my way back downstairs. But when I stepped onto the porch, my cruiser was gone. The car that had been parked on the shoulder was gone too. I stood there, my heart racing, trying to make sense of what was happening. That's when I noticed the figures in the tree line, dozens of them. They stood just beyond the edge of the fog, their shapes barely visible but unmistakably human. They didn't move, didn't make a sound. They just stood there, watching me. I backed away slowly, my hand on my holster, until I was off the property. Then I turned and ran, not stopping until I reached the main road. When backup finally arrived, there was no sign of the figures, the man, or my cruiser. The house was searched thoroughly, but nothing unusual was found. No footprints, no evidence of anyone being there. I filed my report. but the official story was that I'd encountered a squatter who fled when I arrived. My cruiser was found a mile away, parked neatly on the side of the road. No one could explain how it got there. I transferred to another department a few months later, but I've never been able to shake that night. Sometimes in the dead of night, I'll hear static on my radio and think I hear that voice again. They're here. Every officer knows there are calls you don't forget, the ones that stick with you, burrowing deep into your psyche like a splinter you can't remove. For me, it was the night of January 17th, 2014, in the outskirts of a small Michigan town. That was the night I came face to face with something I still can't explain. I'd been on the force for about 8 years by then, working nights in a rural county where things were usually quiet. Burglaries, the occasional drunk driver, a few domestic disputes, nothing we couldn't handle. Our department was small, just 6 full-time officers and a skeleton crew of dispatchers. That night, I was working alone, patrolling the back roads and trying to shake off the cold. The snow was coming down hard, blanketing the woods and fields in a quiet that felt unnatural. Around 2:15 a.m., just as I was thinking about pulling over for a coffee, my radio crackled to life. "Unit 45, dispatch," came the voice of Lucy, our night dispatcher. "Go ahead, dispatch," I replied, grateful for the distraction. "Got a 1054 out on Old Mill Road, about 2 miles past the Thompson farm. Caller reports an abandoned vehicle blocking the road." 10-4, dispatch. I'm en route. Old Mill Road was one of those places you didn't go unless you had to. It wound through the middle of nowhere, flanked by dense woods on both sides. The road was barely wide enough for 2 cars to pass, and in the winter, it was a nightmare to navigate. I reached the location in about 10 minutes, my cruiser's headlights cutting through the falling snow. The vehicle in question was a black sedan, parked sideways across both lanes. Its engine was off, but the driver's side door was open, snow piling up on the seat. "Dispatch, Unit 45, I said into my radio. "I'm on scene. Vehicle appears abandoned. I'll investigate further." "Copy that, 45. Proceed with caution." I stepped out of my cruiser, the cold biting through my gloves as I approached the car. The snow muffled everything, making the world feel muted and distant. The car's interior was a mess. Empty fast food wrappers, crumpled receipts, a half-empty water bottle in the cup holder. But there was no sign of the driver. No footprints leading away from the car either. Just a smooth blanket of undisturbed snow. "Dispatch, no sign of the driver. Vehicles registered to a Jason Palmer, address on Maple Street. Can you try to make contact?" "Stand by," Lucy replied. While I waited, I walked around the car, shining my flashlight into the surrounding woods. The beam barely penetrated the darkness, the trees pressing in like silent sentinels. "Unit 45, Lucy said after a moment. "We've got no answer on the contact number. I'll notify the sheriff and have him send someone to the residence." 10-4, I said, trying to shake the feeling that something wasn't right. That's when I heard it. A faint noise coming from the woods. It was barely audible over the sound of the falling snow, but it was there, a soft, rhythmic tapping. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding too loud in the stillness. No response. I moved closer to the tree line, my flashlight sweeping across the trunks. The tapping grew louder, more deliberate, like someone was knocking on wood. "Jason Palmer, is that you?" I called again. Still nothing. I radioed back to Lucy. "Dispatch, I'm hearing something in the woods. Gonna check it out." "Copy that, 45. Be careful." I drew my sidearm and stepped into the trees, the crunch of my boots on the snow sounding impossibly loud. The tapping continued, steady and unbroken, leading me deeper into the forest. After about 50 yards, I found the source. A tree stripped of bark in places stood in the middle of a small clearing. Something, or someone, had carved strange symbols into its surface. They looked like letters, but not in any language I recognized. The tapping had stopped, replaced by a new sound, a faint whispering, just at the edge of hearing. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, surrounding me like the wind. "Jason?" I called, my voice cracking. The whispering grew louder, rising into a cacophony of overlapping voices. Panic surged through me, and I backed away, my flashlight shaking in my hand. Then I saw them. Figures moved between the trees, their shapes barely visible in the gloom. They were tall, impossibly tall, their limbs too long, their movements too smooth. They circled the clearing, their glowing eyes fixed on me. I raised my weapon, my finger hovering over the trigger. "Stay back!" I shouted, my voice echoing through the forest. The figures didn't stop. I fired a warning shot into the air, but the sound seemed to do nothing. They kept coming, their movements faster now, more erratic. I turned and ran, crashing through the trees and praying I was heading back toward the road. The whispering followed me, growing louder with every step. When I finally burst out of the woods, I nearly collapsed with relief. My cruiser was still there, its lights flashing in the snow. I jumped inside, locking the doors and fumbling for the radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 45. I need backup now. There's something out here." 45. "Calm down," Lucy replied, her voice steady. "What's your location?" "I'm at the scene on Old Mill Road." I froze. The black sedan was gone. 45, "Are you there?" "Yeah," I said, my voice shaking. "The vehicle's gone. The driver's gone. I don't know what the hell is happening." I stayed in my cruiser, the engine running, until backup arrived 20 minutes later. 2 other units showed up, their officers looking at me like I'd lost my mind when I told them what happened. We searched the woods, but there was no sign of the figures or the carved tree. The snow had erased all traces of my footprints, as if I'd never been there at all. The incident was written up as an abandoned vehicle call, with no driver located. Jason Palmer was never found. I transferred to another department 6 months later, unable to shake the memory of that night. Even now, years later, I avoid rural roads whenever I can. Sometimes, late at night, I think about those figures in the woods, their glowing eyes and unnatural movements. I wonder if they're still out there, waiting for someone else to stray too far into the dark. In my 10 years as a police officer, I've seen things I'll carry with me to my grave. Some of them haunt me in the small hours of the night when the world is silent. But there's one night that stands above the rest, a night I wish I could forget, though I know I never will. It was the fall of 2016. I was working as a deputy in northern Minnesota, patrolling a sprawling rural county dotted with dense forests and isolated lakes. My partner Eric and I were assigned to the late shift. Most nights were uneventful, the occasional drunk driver, a domestic call, or wildlife causing minor accidents. That night started out no different. Around 11:45 p.m., our dispatcher radioed in with a call. "Unit 3 to 5, we've got a 1089 at Red Lake Overlook. Caller reports seeing lights on the water. Could be a stranded boater." Eric glanced at me from the driver's seat, raising an eyebrow. "Lights on Red Lake? In this weather? Who the hell would be out there?" He was right. The lake was notorious for its unpredictable currents, and with the cold creeping in, it wasn't exactly the time for a midnight fishing trip. "Stranded or drunk," I replied. "Either way, we better check it out." Red Lake was about a 20-minute drive from where we were. The closer we got, the darker it became. The town's sparse lights faded behind us, replaced by the oppressive blackness of the surrounding forest. The road to the overlook was narrow and winding, with towering pines on either side. The only sound was the crunch of gravel under the cruiser's tires. When we arrived, the overlook was empty. No cars, no people, just our headlights cutting through the night. Red Lake stretched out before us, a vast, inky expanse. The surface was eerily calm, reflecting the crescent moon like a sheet of black glass. But then I saw them, the lights. They were faint at first, flickering near the center of the lake. At first glance, they looked like lanterns, glowing an otherworldly yellow. They bobbed and weaved as if carried by invisible hands. There were at least 5 of them, moving in a slow, deliberate pattern. "You seeing this?" Eric muttered, leaning forward to squint through the windshield. "Yeah," I said, my voice lower than I intended. "You think someone's out there?" Eric shook his head. "No way they could have gotten out that far without a boat. And if they're stranded, why aren't they yelling for help?" We stepped out of the cruiser, the cold hitting us like a slap. The air was heavy, carrying the faint scent of decaying leaves and something else, something metallic, like blood. I grabbed my flashlight and swept the beam across the shoreline. Nothing but rocks and reeds. "Dispatch, this is Unit 3 to 5, Eric said into his radio. "We're at Red Lake Overlook. We've got visual on some lights about 200 yards out on the water. No sign of a boat or people. Over." Static. Then, a garbled response. "Unit 3-5. Repeat. Interference." Eric tried again, but the radio was useless. "Great," he muttered, shoving it back into his belt. "What now?" I didn't answer. My attention was fixed on the lights. They were moving closer, their glow intensifying. I could feel the hair on the back of my neck stand on end, a primal warning I couldn't ignore. Then we heard it, a low, mournful wail that seemed to rise from the depths of the lake. It wasn't human, but it wasn't entirely animal either. It was layered, like multiple voices overlapping, each one slightly out of sync with the others. Eric froze. What the hell was that? Before I could respond, one of the lights broke away from the group, drifting toward the shore. It stopped about 50 feet out, hovering just above the water's surface. For a moment, everything was silent. And then the screaming started. It wasn't coming from the lake. It was coming from the woods behind us. High-pitched, desperate, and agonizingly human. It sounded like a woman, her voice raw with terror. Eric and I spun around, drawing our weapons. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaking despite my best efforts. "This is the police. Where are you?" The screaming didn't stop. If anything, it grew louder, echoing through the trees. Eric grabbed his flashlight and started toward the tree line. "We need to check this out," he said over his shoulder. "Wait," I said, but he was already moving. I followed, my grip tightening on my gun. The beam of my flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing nothing but trees and undergrowth. The screaming stopped as abruptly as it had started, leaving us in suffocating silence. Eric and I exchanged a glance, his face pale and tense. Then we heard it again, the wail from the lake. But this time, it was closer. We turned back toward the shore and froze. The lights had reached the water's edge, forming a semicircle around the overlook. They flickered and pulsed, casting long, shifting shadows that seemed to move on their own. "What the hell is going on?" Eric whispered. "I don't know," I admitted, "but we need to get out of here." As we backed toward the cruiser, the lights began to change. Their soft yellow glow shifted to a sickly green, and the air grew colder, biting through my uniform like knives. My breath came out in thick clouds, each one hanging in the air, longer than it should have. And then I saw them. Figures began to emerge from the lake, their bodies breaking the surface with unnatural grace. They were human-shaped but wrong, their limbs too long and their movements too fluid. Their faces were obscured, but their eyes glowed the same green as the lights. They didn't walk so much as glide, their feet never quite touching the ground. Eric raised his gun. "Stay back," he shouted, his voice cracking. "Don't come any closer." The figures didn't stop. They moved in unison, their heads tilting in perfect synchronization as they advanced. The whispering started again, a low, hissing sound that made my skin crawl. "Eric, we need to go. Now," I said, grabbing his arm. But he didn't move. His eyes were wide, locked on the figures as if in a trance. "Do you hear it?" he murmured. "They're calling me." "Eric!" I shouted, shaking him hard. That snapped him out of it, and we bolted for the cruiser. We barely made it inside before the first figure reached the driver's side window. Eric started the engine, slamming the car into reverse. The tires spun on the icy gravel before catching, and we shot backward, away from the lake. The figures didn't follow. They just stood there, watching as we sped away. We didn't stop until we were back in town, pulling into the station parking lot and locking the doors behind us. When we tried to explain what happened, no one believed us. The official report listed it as a false alarm, citing natural phenomena as the cause of the lights. But Eric and I knew better. We never spoke about it again, but I could see it in his eyes, that same haunted look I saw in my own reflection. I left the force a year later, moved to a city, far from any lakes or forests. But sometimes, late at night, I'll hear that wail in my dreams. And when I do, I wake up with the same thought running through my mind. They're still out there, waiting. There's an unspoken rule in law enforcement. Don't dig too deep into the past. Old cases, unsolved mysteries, or rumors that circulate among officers, they're best left alone. I learned that the hard way during my first year on the job in 2013, stationed in a small precinct in Montana. The precinct itself had been around since the 1920s, a squat, weathered brick building with narrow windows and creaking floors. It felt like it was built to keep secrets. And after what happened, I'm convinced that's exactly what it was doing. I was the rookie, assigned to the graveyard shift. It wasn't a busy town, so most nights were uneventful. My partner, Officer Hayes, was a gruff man in his late 40s who'd been on the force longer than I'd been alive. He wasn't big on small talk, which suited me fine. I was eager to prove myself and didn't want to seem like a greenhorn. One night, around 2:00 a.m., Hayes and I were sitting in the cruiser, parked near the edge of town. The radio was quiet, and the streets were dead. I was half listening to Hayes grumble about his ex-wife when the call came through. Unit 3, dispatch. We've got a 10-31 in progress at the old precinct building. Suspected trespasser. Respond code 2. The old precinct building. Just hearing the words made my skin crawl. It had been abandoned since the 1980s, replaced by the newer station we worked out of. Rumor had it the place was haunted, though no one ever said why. Hayes and I had driven past it a few times during patrols, and every time, I felt an inexplicable unease. The windows were boarded up, the yard overgrown, and the whole structure seemed to lean slightly, as if it were trying to collapse in on itself. "Great," Hayes muttered, starting the car. "Let's go scare off some kids." We pulled up to the building about 10 minutes later. The lot was empty, save for a single street lamp casting weak light over the cracked pavement. The place looked as decrepit as ever, its shadow stretching long and jagged under the moonlight. "Dispatch, we're on scene," Hayes said into the radio. "Copy that, Unit 3. Proceed with caution." We stepped out of the cruiser, flashlights cutting through the darkness. The air felt colder here, and the silence was oppressive, broken only by the crunch of our boots on gravel. "Over there," Hayes said, pointing to the side entrance. The heavy metal door was ajar, swinging gently in the breeze. We approached cautiously, weapons drawn. Hayes pushed the door open with the barrel of his gun, revealing a dim hallway lined with peeling paint and rusting lockers. The air inside was stale, thick with the scent of mildew and something else, something faintly metallic. "Hello?" Hayes called out, his voice echoing down the corridor. "Police, anyone in here?" No response. We moved deeper into the building, our footsteps muffled by decades of dust and grime. My flashlight flickered, and I cursed under my breath, smacking it against my palm until the beam steadied. "This place gives me the creeps," I admitted, my voice low. "Relax," Hayes said. "It's just an old building. Nothing here but rats and bad wiring." But even he didn't sound convinced. As we cleared each room, the tension grew. Desks sat abandoned, papers yellowed with age, still scattered across their surfaces. A calendar on the wall was frozen in time, displaying July 1984. We were nearing the holding cells in the basement when we heard it, a faint whisper coming from somewhere below. "You hear that?" I whispered. Hayes nodded, his jaw tight. "Stay close." We descended the stairs, the wooden steps groaning under our weight. The whispering grew louder, more distinct. It wasn't a single voice. It was a chorus, dozens of overlapping murmurs, just on the edge of comprehension. The holding cells were as derelict as the rest of the building, the bars rusted and the concrete walls stained with watermarks. But as my flashlight swept across the room, I froze. One of the cells was occupied. A man sat on the cot, his back to us. He was wearing a tattered suit, his shoulders hunched, and his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "Sir?" Hayes called out, stepping forward. The man didn't respond. "Sir, this is the police. You're trespassing on government property. Turn around, slowly." Still nothing. Hayes motioned for me to cover him as he approached the cell. I trained my flashlight on the figure, my pulse pounding in my ears. When Hayes reached the bars, he stopped short. "Jesus Christ," he muttered. I moved closer, my stomach turning as the light fully illuminated the man. His skin was ashen, his suit stained with what looked like dried blood. But it was his face that sent a jolt of fear through me. His eyes were wide open, staring blankly ahead, and his mouth was frozen in a silent scream. "He's dead," Hayes said, stepping back. That's when the whispering stopped. The silence was deafening, pressing down on us like a physical weight. I could feel the hair on my arms standing on end, my instincts screaming at me to leave. And then, the lights went out. Panic surged through me as I fumbled for my flashlight, its beam sputtering weakly to life. Hayes was already moving, his own light cutting through the darkness. "Let's get the hell out of here," he said, his voice tight. We turned to head back upstairs, but the way was blocked. A figure stood at the top of the staircase, shrouded in shadow. "Who's there?" Hayes demanded, raising his weapon. The figure didn't move. "Stay where you are," I shouted, my voice trembling. The figure took a step forward, and my flashlight flickered, plunging the room into darkness. When the light came back on, the figure was gone. We didn't wait to see what else might happen. We bolted up the stairs, not stopping until we were back in the cruiser. Hayes radioed dispatch, his hands shaking as he tried to explain what we'd seen. Backup arrived 20 minutes later, but the building was empty. No body, no whispers, no sign that anyone had been there at all. The official report said it was a false alarm, a rookie's overactive imagination combined with a decrepit building's natural creepiness. But Hayes and I knew better. I quit the force a year later, unable to shake the memory of that night. Hayes retired not long after, and I heard he moved out of state. Sometimes, I still dream about that cell, about the man in the suit and the whispers that seemed to come from nowhere. I don't know what we encountered that night, but I do know one thing. Some places are better left alone.